Alright, so welcome everybody. So for this video, I'm going to show you guys how to play Zoo-ography. Now, I already did a video on how to play Zoo-ography. So if you haven't seen that, I suggest you watch that first, especially if you've never played Zoo-ography before. Because I'm going to show you guys how to play Zoo-ography co-op. So as in together, as a team. But it's recommended that you should not play co-op until you have played competitively, okay? At least once, for sure. And then, of course, the only way you can play co-op is if you have the expansion for this game called Connections. If you don't have it, then you can't play co-op either. So basically two requirements you must meet. One, you're going to have a familiarity with the game itself competitively, as in each of you will be building your own unique zoo, okay? And then trying to meet objectives and score stars and having the most stars to win. That's competitive. That's one requirement. You'll have to have an understanding of that. The second requirement, like I said, is you'd also have to have the expansion Connections, which adds monorail pieces as well as the co-op mode. So let's show you guys the changes and obviously how to play co-op for Zoo-ography here. All right. Alright, so the first thing is, when you play co-op, you're actually going to be playing with this side here, the solo side, because you'll notice there's only 9 animal placement spots, and if you're playing competitively, you have up to 10 of these places to put animals down. So there's 9, meaning there's even less than there originally was. But there's also a difference because since there was originally 10, this used to be 3 on this one, and now it's just 2. So this will make it at least a little bit easier to grab animals from here because there'll only be 2 here. That's definitely a lot easier than 3 or 4 for that matter. But that does not necessarily mean that it's going to be easier, because you can get penalized for animals that don't get to be placed here. So one thing to note is when you're placing animals down, because you're going to be drafting tiles just like you would in the normal game, but when you draft a tile and all of these areas are filled up with animals, then instead of the animal going to like a reserve spot, there is no reserve in this game, so you will not be playing with the reserve. But because there is no reserve, any animals that can't be placed here because it's completely full of animals will get deducted towards your objective. You see, you'll notice here it says unplayed. This is basically animals here. So if you end up having more than 5 unplayed animals, hence more than 5 of these animals cannot be placed here when they're drafted, when the tile is drafted, then you'll lose the game. So you can't have more than 5 or you lose the game. Another thing is you're going to be building a national zoo in this game for co-op, and no tile outside a 7x7 grid. That means if there is one tile outside of a 7x7 grid, you lose the game. So that's something you also have to work on. You have to make sure that you keep everything within a 7x7 grid. Another thing is when you're playing with the intro or the relaxed zoo, if you're playing those modes, then you must also place out 18 visitors. You'll have a supply of visitors, which I've set off to the side, but you'll have a supply of visitors of 18, and all of them will have to be placed before the game is over, okay? Otherwise, if they're not all placed in your zoo, you lose as a team again. So that's 3 ways you can lose, but there's more. There is a lot more ways you can lose. So when you play this game, you're also going to be drawing more cards, objective cards. And the objective cards are completely different. There are no objective cards that give out stars. You will not be playing with any of those objective cards. Instead, you'll be playing with these objective cards. Now, this is the monorail objective card, basically. And so if you are just playing competitively, there's even an additional side. So this way you can play with the monorails in a competitive game. But if you're not playing competitively, then you're going to be playing with this side. And you have to basically randomly draw one, basically, from this particular pile of cards, this blue pile here. And you'll have to complete this objective. And if you don't, you lose. What's the objective? Well, for this one, it's connect 5 unique attractions and 5 habitats by monorail with a station on a feature. So there's not very many features in the game, but you must have at least one station on a feature, and then you also have to have all of these monorails basically going through various unique attractions, so 5 of those, and also 5 habitats by monorail as well. So that's something you're going to have to do in order to complete this objective. But then obviously there's more. So then another card you will draw is this red one here. You'll draw this one. And for this one, you have, in order to complete this objective, you must feature and exhibit attractions. So all your feature and exhibit attractions, okay, must be adjacent to at least 4 tiles. So that means when you're placing these tiles that have these symbols here, these 2 symbols, you don't want to place them on the end, because if you place them on the end of your 7x7 grid, well, most likely there'll only be 3 tiles adjacent to them. So basically, they're going to have to go somewhere within the center. So that's another thing, is you're going to be definitely, obviously, having a hard time completing this too. But if you don't complete this particular objective, you lose again. And then there's still one more objective you have to also complete. And that, for this one, with this particular color here, this brown one here, for this one I'd have to do Water World. In order to complete this objective, all habitats, must include at least 1 watering hole. So every single enclosure that you have has to have at least 1 water in it. So all those little side ones that you might build on the outside of the zoo, they must have at least 1 water. Everything has to have at least 1 water. And if you don't, you lose this objective, so you lose the game. So you have to basically complete a total of 6 objectives, and they all have to be basically rectified in order for you to win. That's going to be really difficult. But then again, this is co-op. Co-op games were meant to be hard. Anyways, but that's why it's suggested for your first time you play with just the intro, because if you play with the intro, then you only have to play with the monorail objective and the habitat objective, and so therefore you don't have to play with all 3 of these, which is nice. Still, that's going to be tough to do regardless of the case. So, obviously, regardless of which one you decide to do, intro or relaxed, it's still going to be difficult. And if you think you can handle it, there's even a standard and a challenging mode as well, which makes it even harder to complete as well. Meaning, instead of 5 unplayed animals, you would have to have 3 or less. And then, of course, you would have to have at least 20 visitors to complete. So that's even harder, obviously. But that's the point. This is not going to be an easy game to play co-op. Definitely a little bit easier for sure if you're going to play against each other, but if you're going to work together as a team, prepare to lose, for sure. Prepare to lose a lot. Okay, so I've explained that. But then, also, one other thing that's also really unique about playing co-op is usually when you play co-op, usually when you play standard edition competitively, you'll have a starting hand of tiles. You'll have a zoo entrance, and you'll have another tile that's double-sided, just like this is, and that will be your starting hand. When you play co-op, you will not have a starting hand. So those extra tiles that are double-sided, not including these zoo entrance tiles, they will not be in the game, period, unless you're playing with a particular character known as the architect. And we'll get into the architect momentarily. So that's the thing. But then these are still going to be in the game. You're still going to be playing with these zoo entrances. So basically, when you draft tiles, you're going to do it just like you normally would if you were playing competitively. So let's say this is the first one here I drew. So I would grab the corresponding animal for this tile, which is the zebra, and I would place it at the first spot, and then I would flip the tile over. And then, obviously, I'd grab the next one. Also, this stack of tiles, so let me just get it. It's a huge, huge stack after all, because you're playing with almost every single one of them. Before you shuffle this stack of tiles here, before you do so, you must look through all of these beforehand, before you shuffle, and take out one random tile with each of the main animals on it. So one ostrich, one elephant, one rhino, one giraffe, obviously one antelope, and one zebra as well. So that's another thing. You'll be taking those out of the game and not playing with any of those 6 tiles that you remove unless you're playing with the architect. Unless a player is playing as the architect, and once again, we'll get back to that later. But that's the point. You're going to be not playing with at least 6 of these unless, of course, maybe the architect is also in the game. And you might be playing with some of them. But yeah, you'll draw tiles just like you would in the standard edition, or competitive edition, if you will, and you'll place animals out. So let's do that. Let's grab the next one. Oh, and it was the ostrich for that tile, so I'll just go ahead and place the ostrich down. See, ostrich. The next one is a zebra, so we'll go for and place a zebra down. The next one is another ostrich. Wow, I didn't shuffle these that great, did I? So another ostrich. And then the next one is a secluded animal. Okay, so here's another change in the game. If you're playing co-op, normally when you play a tile that has this symbol, you get to choose your secluded animal. But the first secluded tile that shows up, the first tile with a secluded animal that shows up must be a gorilla. It must be the gorilla. You have no choice. So now the gorilla will get placed at this location, and then we will draw the last tile, because after all, it's 6 tiles to start with. So we have the zebra again. Wow, lots of ostriches and zebras. Okay, so that's all of the animals thus far. Now that means that only leaves 3 available locations. So when a tile is drawn, an animal's going to go there. And then after the 3rd one is drawn, the 4th one, there's not going to be any space, obviously. And it's going to be going towards your maximum of unplayed animals, which would be really, really bad. You don't want that to happen in the beginning of the game. That is for sure. So, obviously, you're going to want to start taking animals as soon as possible and playing them as an action for your turn. Obviously, regardless of who you are, you might want to do that as soon as possible. Thankfully, we've got 2 zebras, which can go together, obviously, and an ostrich and a zebra can go together, obviously. So the only one that might be more difficult is this gorilla, which, because it is considered a large, secluded animal, it is going to require at least 2 watering holes to be placed into an enclosure, in a habitat, if you will. And so that is something that will definitely be a little harder to do, and that's why it's the first one that has to be the gorilla, which we'll place like this, just so you can get a better look at it. Okay, so that's basically the setup for at least the tiles anyways, and so that's at least somewhat similar. Okay, so we explained that fairly well. Okay, now let's explain how each of the different characters work. One thing is, whenever you're playing this game, you're always going to have the director. The director must always be in every game. So if you're playing with more than 2 people, just give this director card to somebody. Maybe there's a player who wants to be a director, or maybe just give it randomly to somebody, but make sure that somebody is going to get this card and they're going to be the director. The rest of these guys, the rest of these characters here, they will randomly get drawn and placed and given to each character one at a time. Okay, so that's what's going to happen. They're each going to be given randomly to all the other players. But let's talk about each of these, okay? So the curator here, another thing is, some of these characters here, they will have a special setup, but the curator does not have a special setup, but the curator has a special action. And the special action is you can swap 2 animals in the draft and take animals. So that's interesting. So whenever you're going to take animals, you can swap 2 animals out in the draft. So maybe you really want to take something over here. Maybe there's an ostrich and 3 zebras over here, and they can all be placed into the same enclosure, and you have space in your zoo for them. But this gorilla here, you don't have any space for it. So maybe you can swap it out with another animal that you would have space for. So, like, for instance, the gorilla could go over there, and the ostrich could go over there, for instance. That is basically what the curator can do. And let's see, how did I have this? Oh, yes. Let's see, the gorilla was definitely there, the ostrich was definitely there, zebras were definitely here. Okay, so, but yeah, that's what the curator can do on their turn as a special action. And just like in normal competitive mode, each character gets 2 actions. So when you're playing competitively, you're going to get 2 actions. Well, when you're playing with all these characters here, you're going to get 2 actions as well. 2 normal actions. But you might have more stuff that you can do as a particular character. And that's what the curator can do as a special action. Okay, then there's the developer. At the start of the turn, you can draw 2 tiles. You'll put 1 tile in the bottom of the deck. So maybe one of the 2 tiles you draw you don't like very much. And so you'll place it on the bottom. Maybe that would be an advantageous ability to do. So that's what the developer can do, and the developer has no special setup either. So that's basically all the developer can do. So that's how the developer works. Okay, so the marketing manager here, it will have a special setup. So let's talk about that first. So after creating the visitor pool based on difficulty, turn this card over and place a visitor from the visitor pool on the spaces at the top of each marketing track. Okay, so that's interesting. So you're going to have 18, if you're playing with, relaxing or introduction, you're going to be playing with 18 visitors. But if you're playing with the marketing manager, you're going to be placing a visitor from the visitor pool, so you're going to be putting 2 of the 18 onto this card here. That means that you still need to be able to place those 2 in your zoo in order to win the game. And if you're playing with the marketing manager, it's going to make things even more difficult, maybe. But this is a hint. Oh yeah. In fact, it even says it here. So as marketing manager, as marketing track requirements are met, the associated visitor will move down the track until it is eventually added to the zoo. So it will eventually get added to the zoo, but it's going to be a lot harder to maybe pull off, maybe. But maybe not. I mean, maybe not. Anyways, so hint, feature attractions are the rarest tiles. There could be as few as 2 in the game. And that means that could be hard to pull off, because that's one of the things that you're going to need in order to get the zoo visitor into your zoo. You see this last one here. So the zoo visitors are going to start here on the character for the marketing manager. In order to get them to go down 1, you're going to have to build one of these types of basically features. And it can be any. It can be a gift shop, for instance. It can be one of these, for instance. It can be a restaurant. It can be the photo booth. Okay, it can be any one of those. It doesn't matter. But every time you place one into your zoo, into the National Zoo, the zoo visitor will move down 1. And so it can be the first 3. It can be any. But the last one has to be that particular one, that feature, basically. And for instance, the petting zoo is one of those. So if you use all of these in the beginning of the game, like the petting zoo, for instance, and I think like the flower garden is the same one as this, I think. Oh, wait, this one is the same one as that, too. So if you placed this dinosaur park and this petting zoo in the beginning of the game into your zoo, you might have less of these or none of these, and therefore you wouldn't be able to get this zoo visitor placed, and then because you couldn't get it placed, you couldn't win the game. So the marketing manager definitely adds, maybe it's definitely going to be adding more trouble to the zoo. It's going to make it harder to win, for sure. But if you want something challenging, someone should definitely play as the marketing manager. Now, the other zoo visitor here is it will move down for every 5 animals you put into your zoo. So the first 5 you put into your zoo, it will move down 1. The next 5 you put into your zoo, it'll move down 1. And then you also will have to have placed at least one secluded animal in your zoo. And then once you've done that, then you'll get to place the zoo visitor onto a zoo entrance, okay? So that's what you're going to get to do. You're going to actually get to place it onto a zoo entrance. This is the only way you'll ever actually place a zoo visitor onto a zoo entrance. But you get the point. That is definitely going to be tough to pull off. But that's how the marketing manager is going to work. Okay, so now let's talk about those tiles. Now, something that is different from a competitive game is at the start of your turn, before you take any actions, you must draft a tile. So instead of having 6 tiles here, you're actually going to have more than 6 because you're going to draft a tile at the start of your turn, adding another tile to the equation. But not only that, but these zoo entrance tiles are also going to be available to take as well. Okay, so it's going to be these 6 plus these zoo entrance tiles that you can take, and I just kind of leave them placed on top of each other because they're the exact same tile anyways on either side. But that's the point. You have lots of tiles to choose from. At least when it's your turn, you're going to have more than 6 tiles to choose from when placing a tile into the zoo. Okay, so that's how that's going to work for the zoo entrance tiles, as well as just simply taking tiles as well. Before you take any tiles and place them into your zoo, or take animals, for instance, or place monorail pieces, etc., etc. Okay, so let's continue on here. So the zoologist, okay, they don't have a special setup. They just have a special ability. When building an empty habitat, you may place one animal into that habitat. So, you know, if you're building a habitat that has no animals in it, for instance, you could place the gorilla down, even though technically when you're playing competitively, you would have to take all of the animals. But if you're the zoologist, you can break that rule and just take one animal from here and place it into that habitat. So that is very, very convenient if you're the zoologist. Okay, so the veterinarian here, it has a special setup as well. After placing the animals in the draft, turn this card over and select one animal from the draft and place it in the vet space. During the game, the animal in the vet can be added to the zoo and requires 1 fewer watering hole. You can only have 1 animal in the vet at a time. And the hint is large secluded animals only need 1 animal in a habitat when played from the vet space. So here's the vet space. So at the start of the game, as the setup, you're going to get to put an animal from here into this space. So maybe you'll take the gorilla because, you know, you can place it easily later. Then while you're the veterinarian, when you're going to take animals and put them into your zoo, you can first take the corresponding animal that happens to be in your vet space currently, and you can go ahead and place it first before you place those other animals as your action. That's pretty cool that you can do that. And then after it becomes empty, you can take an animal from here again and place it back into the vet space. Another cool thing is at the end of the game, if you are unable to place the animal that's still sitting in your vet space, it does not count towards that maximum of unplayed animals objective. It does not count towards that. So that could be very useful, especially at the end of the game. Maybe you can't place a ginormous animal later on, a big giant animal like an elephant, and you could place it, if you had space in a veterinarian, you could place it in there. Maybe if you were able to place other animals and whatever was here originally. That could be somewhat strategic and helpful for the entire, obviously, teamwork and group that are playing the game. So that's how the veterinarian is going to work. Now, the architect also has a special setup. After randomly removing 6 tiles from the deck, randomly select 3 of those 6 tiles to add to your hand. The 3 unselected tiles are then removed from the game without anyone looking at them. Then take the 4 double-sided player tiles and add them to your hand, forming a hand of 7 tiles. Finally, turn this card over. If not playing with the architect, the player tiles are not used in the game. And so, hint, if the architect plays all 7 tiles in hand, there will only be 3 spaces empty in a 7x7 grid at the end of game. So if you're going to be using a lot of these tiles that the architect has, you're going to have less space within that 7x7 grid in order to complete that objective and win the game as well. So here's their special action. As a second action, build a special architect tile. So in a sense, they can actually do 2 tiles on their turn, but the second tile has to be the 7 that they have with them. Meaning it has to be, first of all, one of these first 4, which are right here. And then it would also have to be 3 more tiles that were removed from the game as well. Well, 3 of the 6 anyways, randomly taken, for a total of 7 tiles. So you might still get to play with some of them that were removed from the game if you were playing with the architect, if that's what you were doing. That's how that would work. And then finally, there is one more character. And remember, the director has to be in the game regardless of the case. So the director here, its special setup is, after choosing a difficulty, turn this card over and place a visitor onto the 2 or 3 if you're playing a relaxing or introductory game space of the director's extra action gauge. This visitor will serve to track the director's actions. As actions are added, the visitor is moved up the gauge. As actions are used, the visitor is moved down the gauge. Hint, it is often beneficial to add extra actions each round. Okay? So basically, on the turn of the director, after they draft the first tile, they're allowed to draft a second tile. If they do that, if they draft a second tile, they get to move their action gauge up by 2. So if they're already on 3, they get to go up to 5 actions. That's really cool. And then, before somebody else plays their turn, so like for instance later down the road, I could move one of these actions down to take one action before the zoologist goes, or obviously before the veterinarian goes, or obviously before the architect goes. I can do that, and if I do that, it will go down 1. So maybe I could do that a couple of times before the director's next turn, and then draft 2 tiles again, allowing this gauge to go up twice. Now, when the game is over, okay, when the game is almost over, when the last of these tiles is drawn, basically that will trigger the end of the game, okay? And then the director will get to take 5 extra actions if they have them. So there will be a zoo visitor meeple here on the track to kind of help you keep track of where you are on the gauge, obviously. But wherever this zoo visitor is on the gauge means that's how many extra actions the zoo director will be able to take after the game is over. So maybe perhaps they will be able to accomplish all of the objectives with those extra 5 actions that they can take. That could be very helpful. But then obviously utilizing the director to the fullest by getting to play the director between each of these guys' turns, okay, would obviously also make it more beneficial as well. So that's how the director is going to work. But basically, that's basically how the game will end. When the last one is drawn, that basically triggers the end of the game. And then the zoo director, if has extra actions to take, they will take those actions, and then the game will be over, and then you'll see if you met all of the objectives, okay? Now, one thing I might have not explained fully with the veterinarian is if you have a large secluded animal or a large animal sitting on the veterinarian space and you place it into a habitat, it does not require two watering holes. It just requires 1. So for instance, if the gorilla was sitting here on this space, it could be placed right here if this was the zoo, because there's only 1 watering hole, but because it's been nursed back to health by the veterinarian, basically, it only needs that 1 location. So that's kind of interesting as well that they did it that way for the veterinarian. That could be very useful to have in the game. Okay, so I think I pretty much explained the game fully, at least set up and how things are going to function, obviously. If you're playing with monorails, obviously, which you would be if you were playing co-op, if you have a gift shop next to a monorail, you can place the zoo visitor at, obviously, the gift shop if it's next to a monorail. If you're playing with more If obviously you're going to be playing more of these city gates, you can have more than one of these in your zoo, and the director will place one of these down as the starting zoo. So this will be the starting zoo, will be a zoo entrance. Okay, but then later on, more of these can be placed later on, because it is a national zoo. They tend to have more entrances and exits anyways. But this will make it easier to place zoo visitors in gift shops, for instance. Because if you only had one zoo entrance, then you would have to have a gift shop here, here, and here just to get those utilized, which would be very, very difficult to pull off. So that's why there are more than one of these. So that way you can get as many visitors as possible, because you do need to do that in order to obviously complete that objective. So basically, I think I explained it pretty well. Don't forget to leave me a like, and I'll see you guys again next time. Thank you guys for watching.